Good morning, Port Washington, and welcome to what I hope to be the final Budget and Facilities meeting before we adopt a budget for next year tomorrow. I am your host and the chair of the Budget and Facilities Committee, Dave Kirpin, and joining me today are fellow members of the Board of Education from the Budget and Facilities Committee, Deborah Brooks and Emily Bass, our Vice President, Beth Weisbert, our President, Nora Johnson, and our fellow board trustees, Larry Greenstein, and is Rachel here? Rachel is not yet here, but I'm sure Rachel Gilliard will be joining us momentarily. From our administration, we have Dr. Michael Hines, our superintendent. Good to see you this morning, Mike. We've got Mary Callahan, our assistant superintendent for business. Always a pleasure to see you, Ms. Callahan. Christopher Shields, our assistant superintendent, and Elaine Fennick, and Jim Restano, and Jessica Mack, and Ruth Smith, and the elusive, always interesting video engineer. I believe that is John Johnner today. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, members of the community. Thank you for tuning in. We have just one item on the agenda, and that's talking about the budget for 2020-2021. Ms. Callahan, I will begin with asking you to summarize where we currently are and what outstanding issues, if any, you may know of that the board has inquired about via email. Ms. Callahan? Ms. Callahan, very unfortunately, you are muted. I will ask you to unmute because much as it's great to see you, it's even better to see and hear you.
I totally agree. Good morning, everybody. As of now, as of the latest version of the budget, we have a budget increase of 1.21. So many versions here. 1.21 and a tax levy increase of 1.96%. That is far lower than our legally allowable tax levy limit. We have gone from a budget back in February that had a 3.98% increase with a levy increase of 3.96. And over the course of the last 2 months, we have cut contractual codes to all of the schools by over $470,000. We have reduced our transfer to capital line by over $1 million by changing our plan for the Salem roof and by removing a project for track resurfacing and some ongoing planning for asbestos removal if needed. We have reduced buildings and grounds, equipment and supplies by $95,000. We have in our current proposal the accessing, which means people who currently hold positions. We have 7 paraprofessionals budgeted to be eliminated in this budget. We have planned to access 9 permanent substitute teachers. We have reduced some curricular project funding by $30,000. And perhaps I did not say the paraprofessionals that had a value of $280,000 associated with it, and the permanent subs had a value of $65,000 associated. We have reduced dramatically the supervision for co-curricular and sporting events by over $73,000, and transportation for field trips has been cut by $68,000. We do have a retirement of a music teacher. That position will not be replaced, saving $78,000. We are eliminating playground equipment that had been put into the budget last year for the first time, considering our new construction at various schools. That has a value of $50,000. We have one elementary section that does not need to be filled based on enrollment, and that has a savings of $78,000. And then there will be a portion of a clerical salary of an individual who works in the pupil personnel office that will be transferred to a grant. The overall savings that we have achieved during this 2-month period is $2,661,266 to be exact. Also, as I mentioned previously, we had a 3.96% levy increase. We are now at the 1.96, which puts us exactly in the middle of our surrounding districts, with North Shore being at 3.03% and the lowest at the moment being Syosset at 1.6%, but they have not yet adopted. Most of our surrounding districts, just like Port, certainly were entitled to higher allowable levy increases. But because all school boards do understand the situation that homeowners are facing due to the pandemic, they have all, with the exception of perhaps one or two, reduced their levy by taking money from their reserves to help offset those taxes. That is bringing you up to the moment, and you tell me where you would like this budget to go from this point, please.
Thank you so much, Ms. Callahan. And because I didn't say it this meeting, I will take a moment to thank you again for your yeoman's work. I believe that's the first time I've ever said that word out loud. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Your incredible work to date is very, very much appreciated by the entire board and certainly the entire committee, and certainly, to use one of your favorite words, by me. So thank you very, very much. And to those of you that for some reason have been under a rock and have not been paying attention, that are watching at home, I will note that obviously it pains us to great ends to make these cuts. But it's a question of two things for me, at least. One is how do we assure that in the cuts that we make, we avoid to the greatest extent possible cutting into the core and cutting into things that will potentially hurt our kids' education. And two, how do we create a responsible budget that will pass in a very, very challenging time. So those are for me the filters that have helped to direct Mary to get us this far as we have. We have some questions in the chat that I will turn to in just a moment. But first, Ms. Callahan, as you know, in my very long-running saga to save us some dollars, I reached out to you to inquire about whether we thought perhaps the print and copy center could be run with one employee instead of two. And I believe that it is your opinion. I will not put any words in your mouth. Were you able to potentially find some savings in this regard, Ms. Callahan?
There are two people in the print and copy center. The best I can say is that one of those individuals did unfortunately have to be out for several months this past year, and the work that was submitted to the copy center was able to be completed. I can't tell you specifically what those projects were, but the ones that were submitted were able to be completed. And on the basis of that, I would say that if we needed to make an additional cut, that it has been done on a temporary basis. I would say, however, whatever projects this person cannot do would have to be sent out. I'm not quite sure that there are funds available at the building level to send out projects, but it would seem that there is a potential for the shop to run and do some work, and probably more than half the work with one person. But that would be determined if that position were to be cut.
Thank you, Ms. Callahan. As you all know, I feel strongly about this, and I do move that we access this position, given the fact that this work all got done while this position was not being utilized in the last year, and I think that we either use that as savings in the budget, or use that to offset, use the dollars saved to offset the accessing of paras and replace accordingly. Only because we're still on this topic. Before I go to other questions, I believe Emily's asked what the savings associated with that position would be, Ms. Callahan.
I did not calculate specifically, but I would put it close to the same as a little greater than a teacher. So it would have to be in the first year about $50,000, because I'm considering the unemployment benefit, but beyond that, it would be the full salary of the individual, which would probably be closer to 65.
Okay, and Emily's asking how many paras could be put back. I would think that would be essentially 2. Am I?
We assumed $40,000 for a para, so that would really be 1.
Okay. Thank you. We can come back to that topic in a little bit. We've got Larry, then Nora, then Deb.
Okay, thanks, Mary. When we last spoke, we were at 1.99, which is supposedly the psychological fault line that we could not go above. Now we're at 1.96. How much is that difference in dollars?
It's $165,000.
So why are we accessing paras when we can still be below that 1.99 and not get rid of 7 really vital people in the district? Why was that decision made not to restore them?
I don't know, Larry, that a decision was made. I was simply given information over the weekend and made an assumption that it was a further cut. But if the board wants to restore the dollars into a different code, that certainly can be done.
I was very uncomfortable with having a budget that met a specific dollar limit rather than a specific educational quality limit. So certainly, I don't think we should go 1 penny below what we need to do. I think those paras are vital. I think we need to have them back. I think there's plenty that we can restore that is important to every cut you made is important to kids. There is nothing that we had that's not important. So everything that we've had to cut has affected the kids in one way or another. And so giving them needless cuts just because they're there, that doesn't seem valid to me. And I think we should restore the paras immediately.
Thank you, Larry. Nora?
Like me, you are muted, Nora.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I too believe that the paras are an integral part of our delivery of education, and they're an integral part of the district. So I do think we should restore them. We never really lost them. We talked about accessing them, but I think they should be, and I'd like to see them back in the budget. The one question I have, Mary, is that you mentioned initially that we have saved $2,661,266 because the buildings have been closed and the facility shut down. Is that so far, or is that your projection through the end of June?
I'm sorry, Nora, are you speaking about the number I just provided?
The number you just gave about how much we've saved, I was wondering if that's
That was,
to date, or is that anticipated through?
Nora, sorry
No,
to cut
that
you off. That was the. Go ahead, Mary.
that is the monies that we have cut from the original proposed budget for
Oh,
next year. That
sorry.
is not the savings that we have enjoyed thus far because of school being closed.
Okay.
We're in the process of reviewing that. We've had multiple meetings with our auditor to try to come to a tight framework to be able to provide that information to the superintendent.
All right, because I thought it sounded lower. Anyway, I was confused.
Yes.
Obviously my mistake. The other question I had was how we got from the 1.99 to the 1.96, but I think that's been answered. And if we restore the powers, I think it'll go back up. So
Yes.
that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Please, whoever's doorbell just rang, please be careful and social distance as you get the door.
I will. It was me, and I'm going to mute so you won't even hear about it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nora. Next up is Deb.
So I have several questions. One is that back in the beginning of March, which now 2 months ago, it might as well be 10 years, we were looking at Dr. Hines's proposed budget, and we had added 6.6 full-time employees. And I just want the community to be aware of the fact that not only do we have all these cuts to the existing budget, but I guess the majority, if not all of those additions that that Dr. Hines was proposing, how many of those are no longer going to come to fruition? We talked about the STEAM teacher, one additional STEAM, the bilingual kindergarten, 2 security guards, world language at Weber, and on Dr. Hines's wish list for sometime in the future was a social worker at Weber. So I want to impress upon the community that not only are we cutting from the existing budget, but we're losing, because it was never approved, but losing the things that had been proposed back the last draft budget I have is from March 5th. So just wanted to make that comment. Larry went over the paraprofessionals, I agree. At the last budget meeting, we talked about the music teacher at Weber. And Dr. Shields, I know you outlined what the accessing of that music teacher at Weber would mean, but given our very strong creative arts department and all the awards we've won, and because of our great music programs, I was just wondering if you could please repeat what the accessing of that music teacher means in terms of going forward for the people who weren't here last time.
Could I just correct the verbiage?
Yes, please.
Because we're not accessing a music
Attrition.
teacher. This person is retiring. We will not replace the position.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for correcting.
It's a painful word when you say accessing.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yes.
But Dr. Shields, just for the newcomers here today, if you could please explain what that would mean up at Weber.
Yes, of course. Our instrumental groups that have lessons will be larger in size across a chorus, orchestra, and band. And 6th grade students who take chorus will not have that lesson environment and where they get to have a smaller group instruction around chorus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is actually Emily had the a question that I already read, and we have a couple folks that agree. So, not seeing any comments here, I will put forward the discussion for the group around the restoration of the Paris line in the budget. It seems like we may have consensus on that. Also, for your consideration, the accessing of one of the two positions in the print and copy center. I will be shocked if I ever get to consensus on that, but nonetheless, I will put that forward for your consideration, each of the items. So if you have comments on either of those, please post. Emily, I'll ask you to hold off on that question unless it pertains to what I mentioned.
It does pertain to what you just mentioned.
Then you're up
So,
first.
so I just really want the numerical number. So if we put back the Paris, which was equal to $280,000, as Mary said, and we eliminate the one person from the print shop, do we then stay within that 1.99, I guess is my question. So for the mathematical purposes, and because I do want to agree with you, Dave, that if there's a way for the position for the Paris to be put back in, I think that they are critical. We've all kind of seen that. And I also think that if there, as Mary said, if the job was done by one person at the print shop, then I think we can proceed by doing one with one person at the print shop. So I support your almost success of a print shop. So that was really my point. I just wanted to know, can we get to all of those, the numbers that we want by adding back and so forth. So I guess it's Mary to do some numbers.
Yep. Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Beth and Nora, for chiming in on the chat. I would encourage others to chime in on the chat if you have a sort of an easy yes or a perspective that might not need to be discussed. And I was stalling for you for a moment there, Mary. I'm not sure if you've been able to do the quick math to answer Ms. Bay's question.
I think that you are still about $75,000 shy of your goal.
Of 1.99. So
yes, in order to return all the paras.
So what we could potentially do is access that one position, restore as many of the paras as we could, perhaps all but one or all but two, and stay at 1.99. My guess is that is something that we could potentially get consensus on. So Mary, if you can, while I turn to the next folks, do that sort of math briefly or as quickly as possible, and how many of the paras we could potentially restore. In the meantime,
you'd be able to restore 5 of the 7.
5 of the 7 comfortably and stay at 1.99. Thank you. So thank you, Rachel, for chiming in, and thank you, Larry, for chiming in. And Beth, you are up.
Thank you, Dave. Mary, I know Larry had suggested this over the weekend, and given that we're at like only 2 accessing, I think I personally would be comfortable taking that little bit of money out of reserves and adding to the budget. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that, but I would rather see all of those positions restored when we're talking about that little amount from fund balance. I think, Dave, if you want to put that out to everybody else, that's where I would stand right now.
Well, thank you, Beth. I think that's a fine idea, and I can definitely get behind that. And so I will put that proposal forward to the board. So to recap, we would be accessing one position in print and copy. We would be restoring all of the para positions. 5 of the 7 would be restored in the budget, and 2 would be restored in money that came from reserves, or that we would plan on doing. Does that, Beth, can you just give me a note on the chat if that recaps successfully your proposal? And then we have, I believe, some questions here. Thank you, Beth. See, I actually really like leading virtual meetings because I have both chat and face-to-face. So it's actually an extra tool that we have in our sleeve. So Deb wants to know where that would leave the fund balance. And Mary Rachel wants to know what percentage we would be at if we added all paras into the budget without reserves. I mean, being a former math teacher, I will tell you it would be something like 2.0 or 2.01. But we would. But I will defer to Mary for the actual answer there.
I think I would go with the 2.0, Dave, if we do not take the $80,000 from fund balance.
And can you answer Deb's question, Mary, where that would leave the fund balance if we were to pull the additional 80,000 from reserves?
Well, right now we have over $5 million in fund balance, so it would bring it down by $80,000. I don't have the exact number. Hold on, I'll get the file.
I think Deb has deferred, Mary, so you need not. But much appreciated. And to anyone that's watching, I'll just say really briefly that while those reserves might seem larger than you might expect, compared to other districts, they are actually far smaller. And we are anticipating potential major cuts that we from the state that we simply have to have as you know, a strong amount in our reserves, and that is definitely the current will of the board. Thank you, Nora, for chiming in on restoring paras from fund balance if necessary. Rachel's asked, and when I mention a question, if you want to jump in and say it for yourself, you certainly may. Rachel's asked, do we actually believe that the difference between 1.99 and 2 is important in terms of passing this budget? Speaking only for me, yes, I do, very, very much so. I think that that's as somebody that has been studying the psychology of pricing for many years with my entrepreneur hat on, I can tell you that it's sort of a running joke that my teams will always know that I would prefer $1.99 to $2. Always. And obviously these things are not the same, but for me at least, Rachel, there is a strong psychological advantage to 1.99. Feel free others to chime in on that in the chat, or if you'd like to speak to it, you can post as well.
Dave, can I just speak, because I did write to Rachel in the chat, and I do agree with you, and I said that in the chat, but I think I want us to be. Nobody wants to be at these numbers. This isn't a board that has come on and said, let's, cut programming and let's cut because we think that there's excess. I believe that this is because of the circumstances that we're in. So ideally, we would not be in this position. Ideally, we would be adding all the positions that we had originally spoken about in February and still been at our cap. Unfortunately, that's not the choices we have today. And I think, personally, I'm also afraid that even at the 199, we are not going to get enough people to vote yes for it or to support the budget. So I'm still concerned. And yet I do not want to go any further. I want to stay where we are because that would mean more detrimental programming. And I think if you're looking at all the cuts that have been made, I think that most of the reductions have been in lines where I don't think it will affect the programming. The children won't be affected as much. So we've done everything we can to restore the positions of actual teaching positions, such as the esteemed teachers, what we talked about earlier. So I think we're doing everything we can, other than the attrition that we're not putting back and so forth. I believe we're doing everything we can to try to keep the programming as intact as possible. So I'm just asking that we all don't forget that we're trying our hardest.
Thank you, Emily. I'm not seeing a lot of comments, and we do have actually a rare feat, some time on our hands. I would suggest that we do have a proposal on the table here, and so I'd like to everyone to weigh in, either in the chat or to speak. And I think we probably have consensus, but every time I say that, of course, we don't. So again, to recap Beth's proposal, we would be restoring the Paris, we would be accessing the print position, and we would be pulling from reserves the approximately $75,000 to $80,000 in order to keep the budget at 1.99%. And then so while we digest that, Larry and then Rachel.
Okay,
Larry.
thank you. Mary, we have 5 million in reserves now. What is your anticipation that we will have on June 30? I know it's not a real number, but what's your best guess?
I love how you say it's not a real number, but
Not a hard number. I'm sorry, not a hard number.
yeah,
So,
the hard number is much better. Of the 5, we will take out 1 because we're applying that to offset next year's taxes. Now we're taking out 1,080,000 or 1,075,000, whatever's required, bring us down to 4. And then looking at what we have unspent this year, as long as our revenues come in as anticipated, we could have as much as $3 million left. A large portion of that is because of unexpended transportation monies because services were not delivered. That would probably account for half of that fund balance savings.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll be a little bit higher than that. I guess I'd sort of like to piggyback on what Beth said, because I'd like to propose that we take $250,000 out of fund balance and put it into the budget for unforeseen circumstances. Say we have another couple of IEPs that require paras and we have to add to the para staff. Say we have say the transportation contracts come in a little higher. There's not, normally you protect us from ourselves and have money put places where we can transfer. I'm not sure I'm not sure that's possible this year at 1.99. So I think we should just basically have a contingency in there. And if it turns out that everything goes well, that can roll over to next year. Or if it turns out that the educators see a pressing need in the district, then we can have it. I read the principal's memo this morning, and we're not going to be having some of those computerized enrichment things that we've had in the past. I mean, everything we're doing is affecting the kids. And so I think if we have this cushion, I don't think it will hurt our reserves too much because we did save money. We also don't know if we need to buy 100,000 masks next year. We don't know what it's going to look like. We could go into reserves for emergencies, but we can't go into reserves for unforeseen items that aren't an emergency. So anyway, so I'd like to propose that we add $250,000 from reserves into the budget just for to cover those contingencies, and if the educators see any need for it down the road as things play out.
And for the sake of the folks who may be listening who do not follow this process, I believe what you're saying is the budget number itself would increase by $250,000. The taxes would not change at all for the community because the district is supporting that expense on its own, but it's included into the larger picture of the full budget. And
yes, we're bringing the budget number closer to the tax number by a little bit.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I would be very appreciative of that because I have never created a budget as tight as this budget is for next year.
So anyway, if we have consensus on that, I'd like to move that forward.
Thank you, Larry. Feel free to post in the chat on that. Next up is Rachel.
Thanks, Dave. So I agree with Larry on the cushion. I think that anybody who's been paying attention at these meetings knows I'm not comfortable with this 1.99 number. I never have been. I would like it to be higher. That said, this is where we're at, and this is the financial reality, and I do support this budget. And I think that it's important to note that some remarkable mathematical gymnastics have been performed to get us to a number that we never could have imagined being able to get to without cutting into our programs. So I really appreciate that, Mary. I think the impact on the kids is so much lower than anybody could imagine could possibly be achieved at a 1.99 budget. And I thank you, the entire administration, for doing that. And I do support the 1.99 at this point. I am in agreement with Larry about putting a cushion in from reserves. We don't have to spend it. But one of my biggest concerns here in making this budget as tight as it is that we have no idea what next year brings. I mean, a month ago, we didn't know what this month was going to look like. In March, we didn't have any sense that we were going to be here at this point. And I think to think that we can, with any certainty, predict what September looks like is just not, it's not possible. And so we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, which is whatever it looks like, there are more expenses, not fewer expenses. I love the fact that we're restoring the paraprofessionals. I think retaining as many positions as possible is a great goal. So I'm on board for everything that has been proposed so far.
No, we're not.
Thank you, Rachel. Emily has a question.
Thank you. I actually support Larry's recommendation as well. I have a question though. What happens if we need more than what Larry is proposing? So I guess the question is for Mary. Am I right in believing that if there's an emergency, we're allowed to go into reserves so that we will not be limited by the 250,000? I guess that's my question, Mary.
We are limited by the 250,000, as Larry has said, unless, as you truly say, it's an emergency similar to the Guggenheim roof leaking. But to buy extra masks, no, we will have to take money from someplace that already exists in the budget.
Okay, so what happens though when, and I say when, the state aid number changes? And as we know, we were at one point, for anybody who is following along, we were talking about a May 1st deadline. We believed May 1st came, the governor said, or May 15th, I don't remember, I've lost track of dates, but they basically said, we're not going to be making any cuts right now. We are down by 14% the state, but the governor believes very strongly that the Congress is going to come and help states. And so they haven't made cuts to any of the funding at this point. However, they did say that by the end of May, that could happen. If Congress doesn't come through, by the end of May, they may end up doing cuts. So we put in 250,000 for this situation. Let's say it doesn't happen now. Where are we when we get our cuts? Or where are we when in September we need to open and we find out that we need new desks, as we've discussed in the past, or we need, to have staggered schedules or whatnot that is going to create extra costs? What do we do? And wouldn't state aid be an emergency is what Larry's asking, and that's what I was asking also. And anything that is related to this pandemic, would that not be considered an emergency?
I think that the loss of state aid can be considered an emergency. I don't know that the fact that it's a pandemic in itself is considered enough of an emergency, because the thought process is that we should be planning for whatever we need in a budget. And the expectation is that if school is not operating as traditionally it has in the past, some of the funds that we would not need for a particular activity would then be applied to a new expense that we had not anticipated. But state aid in itself will be treated differently depending on what district you are in. Some districts will apply more fund balance, and some districts will make cuts at the time the aid factor is recognized.
Thank you, Mary and Emily. I'm going to Beth will be up next. Before I call on Beth, I do have a monkey wrench here, which is that I continue to be, and I think Beth and others continue to be very concerned about our ability to get a yes vote, even at 1.99%. And so what we have to weigh before we move forward with this, what we have to weigh is how likely it is that we'll get a yes vote at 1.99 versus how likely it might be to get a yes at, say, 1.49 or 0.99. Obviously, we get a no, we're at contingency and we're at 0. And none of us wants that. None of us wants to significantly deplete our reserves, which would put us in a very precarious position were state aid to be cut. But I submit that I think that we should at least consider potentially pulling more from reserves in order to fund the budget at a smaller levy increase or smaller percent increase if we think that might help our chances of getting to a yes. To answer your question, Rachel, yes, I would submit that we at least consider pulling from reserves in order to get to a number even smaller than 1.99 if we think that will increase our chances for yes, which it may not anyway, but I do think so. Thank you for waiting so patiently, Beth. You're up.
Thank you, Dave. Honestly, I'm not sure that it moves the needle enough that it's worth it for us to go through the exercise of doing it, because I think it's simply too much money given the fact that we don't have the answer on state aid. If we had the answer on state aid, I'd be fairly comfortable doing it. However, I think I'm fairly comfortable that a little bit of a cut is not going to make a difference to the people who are those hard no voters right now. I would have to say, though, to Larry's suggestion, I like the idea. I think I would up it a little bit more as long as we didn't allocate the money in a way that we couldn't reallocate it to cover the state aid loss if there is. I think the $250,000 cushion is nice. I would take it to $500,000, knowing how much money we will likely have left at the end of this year, with the understanding from all of us that's the first money to cover state aid. That if we have the state aid loss, that money will cover that. But it would give us the option of potentially in a situation where the budget passes and perhaps no cuts to state aid, that perhaps we could move forward a little bit in the ways that we were hoping to in March if things go well. And if they don't, it will cover other costs that we don't foresee yet, like additional transportation or other issues that we might have. So I am very much in favor of Larry's cushion, with the understanding that we would have that money still in the budget to make up the state aid. In other words, we're all comfortable with the positions that we have right now, and that's the positions that we're moving forward with. And if the state aid doesn't get cut, perhaps we can add.
Could I have clarification? Am I hearing that you want to take money from fund balance and you do want to increase the budget? Because if you just take money from fund balance without increasing the budget, what you are doing is lowering the tax levy. You need
Mary, to be clear, yes, that's what I was proposing, that we would take money from fund balance and maintaining the 1.99 tax levy. So yes, increasing the budget,
okay.
with the understanding that you'll have to put money back into codes. I understand that, but that $500,000 is there And if state aid gets cut dramatically, like we think it might, that money will shift to cover that cut. And if it doesn't, and we move into September without those, then at least some of the things that we have taken away, we will be able to perhaps put back.
Right, okay, I understand.
Thank you, Beth. So we have a couple things on the table here. I'm not sensing any traction with my suggestion that we perhaps consider pulling money from reserves in order to further reduce the levy limit, which is fine. I was simply suggesting that we consider it. Of course, after we pass this, after we do adopt a budget, our attention as a board will turn to the hard work required in passing that budget. We also have a couple of proposals from Larry at 250K and Beth at now potentially 500K to restore to the budget with the understanding that it would be sort of the first money to be used for to make up for losses in state aid. Hopefully, I've recapped that correctly, Larry and Beth. Larry has asked to hear from Mike. Larry, I don't know if you can speak to or post in the chat any particular questions you may have for Mike, so that he might prepare himself for that.
My question is just, what does he think about these various scenarios in terms of, I mean, I'm fine with Beth's number, but what does he think of the concept, and what does he think the risks are of, if any, of not having a cushion, and just his general take on where we are in the budget, because it's going to be up to him to, along with Mary and the team, to figure out how we're going to implement the budget. So I want to know if he sees, how smooth sailing ahead he sees.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the fact that the board's even considering A, having a cushion, and B, just as if not more important, restoring the paras. I think that's exceptional, because it really will affect kids in a positive way by bringing them back. So I appreciate the board considering doing what you're doing. As far as the cushion's concerned, I think 250 is a good start. 500, to know that we do have that flexibility as we plan for September. I can tell you right now, I can't see Mary physically. I can see her virtually, but I know that makes her feel a lot better, and it does make my team feel a lot better too, knowing that we can plan accordingly, knowing that we have that flexibility. Because again, there are some things that are unknown, but for those of us who are tuned into the news, not only here regionally, but you're watching what's taking place internationally for schools that are going back right now and or planning for the fall. You're seeing things that we've been talking about, such as the staggered schedules, such as thermal, the scans for kids, and the things that we will more than likely need to have when this all begins. So to have that cushion and that flexibility does make us feel a heck of a lot better. And on the other side, I understand where Dave's coming from, trying to lower the levy. We're going to have, not to use his word again, but a yeoman's task to get the word out to the community as far as educating the community about what this budget entails. And I think just as important, if and when it does go on a contingency, what that entails as well. So this is, I've said it before, the next few weeks will determine, I believe, the next few years for this great school district. And I know that we're up for the task. So this definitely does help for sure.
Thank you, Mike. Rachel, you are up next.
So my question is for Mary, just to clarify for the community, because again, I think we're planning for something that's difficult to plan for. One of the reasons I'm comfortable with not replacing the retiring music teacher is I'm not sure fall is going to look like school normally looks here. And I'm not sure that, therefore, all the things that we think are where we're going to be spending money are all the places that we are going to need to spend money. And I think we're in the process of reimagining education, right? Except in a quick and dirty, on the ground way instead of a lofty philosophical way. So Mary, am I correct in thinking that within the budget itself, so the community understands this, there is flexibility in moving things from line to line once the actual budget number has passed? So I know, our superintendent and the rest of the administration are in the process of planning for what hopefully won't happen, but I think likely will happen, which is we're doing remote learning in the fall. And if we find in the process of this planning that we need money in different places than where it is, and we need less money in some of the places that it exists, we can move that money around to conform to what's a sound educational plan for the fall. That's correct, right? As long as it's in the budget and has been approved by the community, we can adjust as necessary for the district with some exceptions. Can you just speak to that for a minute?
Yes, certainly I can. The money is not moved willy-nilly. I don't want anybody to think that. The board has a policy, and all our policies are on our website. The policy states that anything under $5,000 can be moved with my authority. Anything up to 10,000 goes to the superintendent. All of those transfers within those ranges go to the board for their information, and anything greater than $10,000 is approved at a public board meeting. And yes, it can be moved. With the exception of moving money into the equipment codes of the district, that is not allowed for some reason through New York State. But other than that, and the transfer to capital line, funds can be moved.
Thank you, Mary. And I didn't mean to imply that this is something that is done, but literally nothing we're doing right now is business as usual. So we may have to take advantage of some powers we have that we normally don't exercise, because when you're engaging in good planning and good budgeting, it's simply not necessary to move big sums of money because you've planned effectively for the year. But we're on quicksand here, and so I think it may be that we are facing those kind of things. So I think it's good for people to understand that if we need it, we do have that flexibility, and obviously we'll do it publicly, like we do everything, with a lot of community information and the opportunity for input.
Okay, we need to get to a budget that we will be adopting tomorrow. So I'm going to recap some of the changes we've made today and make sure that we have consensus amongst the committee and board. It sounds like what we've discussed is restoring the paras and accessing the print and copy center position, and pulling from reserves approximately $575,000, $75,000 of which to cover the paras, and $500,000 of which to cover unforeseen expenses due to losing state aid. That would keep the levy limit at 1.99%, and we would then turn our attention to the yeoman's work of getting the budget to pass. If anyone disagrees with what I have just said, please do post in the chat. Otherwise, I will presume that it is the consensus of the committee and board to move forward as indicated. I will give you guys just a moment to post in the chat. You needn't post in the chat if you're in favor, although it's always nice. But please, you must post in the chat if you are against or feel the need to speak further on the matter. And if we are getting consensus, so I'm going to say that 4 is enough for consensus, but I will ask 5. Very exciting. We will all, of course, be needing to share our commitment to this in the vote tomorrow. I am seeing that we do, in fact, have very, very strong consensus on this. Fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much. I'm going to turn to community comments in just a moment. There are several comments that appear to be less like comments that they want read into a public meeting, and more like, after I spoke too soon, perhaps, about how courteous people were previously, more like critiques. We'll do my best to read everything that I think is appropriate, both the comments and the questions, in just a moment here. Rachel has asked, before I do that though, if there's an additional downside to putting more in from reserves. Mary, do you want to speak to that?
Dave, I go ahead, Mary.
The only downside I would see from putting in any more from reserves would be that, excuse me, when the state looks, excuse me, when the state looks at our end of year audit, they could say that we had turned the corner and become in fiscal stress, because they would see our fund balance were too low according to their standard. They might adjust their standard, but I have seen in the last year or so that there are points when ascribed to a fund balance in our district when it drops below $5 million. Sorry. When it drops below $5 million, that the state could consider us as potentially being in fiscal stress. It's a monitoring option the state provides the community to be aware of the fiscal health, but it's nothing other than additional information to make people informed.
Does it impact our borrowing capability too, as well, though?
It could. We certainly have a AA2 rating, which is excellent. I don't think it would move the basis points too many in the wrong direction. But again, the economy is such that I can't speak to what could be the situation in 6 or 8 months.
So the reason I'm asking is just what, the idea of what this number should be that we pull from reserves, the 250 versus the 500. I generally would be in favor of a bigger number because I think there's so much uncertainty. I'm just wondering if you have an opinion on whether or not we should be pulling even more than that into the budget from reserves, with the understanding that it's an emergency fund. It's not that we intend to be spending that money, and we'll sort of deal with it as things come. But Mary, can you maybe give an opinion on that? I'm sorry, I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
There was one year when this fiscal stress policy first came to light, when the school district was designated as potentially in fiscal stress, and we rebounded from that. It had no impact on our borrowing at that time. I know that this board is generally a very conservative board to begin with, and I would not anticipate, after a budget has been passed, hearing that we were adding back items, because we're putting forth a budget honestly, and it would only be used for emergency. So I don't see that it would be that difficult choice to make. You could put more in, and then at the end of the year, what is not spent is returned to fund balance again. It's like having a little bit more money in your wallet when you go out to do something in case of an emergency. The money is there, and if you don't spend it, you put it back in the bank at the end of the day.
For me, it's sort of six one way, half a dozen the other, because ultimately we'd be pulling from the reserves if unforeseen emergency expenses came up, and I have to believe that mid-year cuts to state aid would be just that. All right, I spoke too soon, so community, thanks for your patience. Beth is up next.
Thanks, Dave. Just a quick comment, Rachel. I think we have to be careful to find a good balance here, because if we start saying we can pull more money into reserves, then why are we not also decreasing the levy? So I think that, then the community is going to wonder why we're not going with Dave's 149 or some other number. So I think that the 500,000 I think is a comfortable number, and I think we could do that. I think if we do too much more, it's not going to, for the people who aren't watching these meetings, which is the majority of our voters out there, they won't understand. And I think that let's try and sort of strike that balance in between.
Thank you, Beth. That was an unspoken point of mine as well, so I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, thank you very, very much to members of the committee and board. I'm going to turn to the community now. Before I do that, I mentioned some thank yous earlier. I want to call out one more group, which is our technology team. We've had to overnight change the way we deliver education and also change the way we deliver these meetings, and our technology team has really risen to the occasion. So huge kudos to Ryan and Chris and John and the entire technology team at the school district. I greatly appreciate you all. Okay, so this is where it gets fun and interesting, and thanks in advance for being courteous. Claire May noted that she subbed in the print shop, and an individual can do everything there themselves. In the end, it seems that the print shop does save the school district money. Thank you, Claire. Jean Marie Lavigny, apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name. On the draft that is online, there is $14,500 more budgeted for conferences, with $5,000 allocated for conference, not board members of BOCES. Is this necessary? Mike, I'm not sure if you can, Mike or Mary, I'm not sure if you guys can speak to the dollar amount that's budgeted for conferences for next year. I'm lower. Go ahead, Mary.
Conference money can also be for staff development. We believe that at this time, teachers need a great deal of staff development, and a lot may be done remotely, but that would be considered as part of the spending in that code.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Dave, the conference money is not only, let's just say, because we have in-house PD, certainly with our wonderful tech team, but also we have to think about the trauma and what it means about mental health and everything. And we want to make sure everybody's up to speed in regard to what that means, not only for our students, but for our families. And I was just talking to Dr. Allen before about having somebody come in, not only over the summer, but certainly for the fall, to talk about trauma and to talk about all these different types of stresses and what we can do to assist families. So I would say at this point, that conference money is warranted.
Thank you, Mike and Mary. Lee Heather, I'm not sure if that's Lee Heather or Heather Lee. Hard to know, but I will say what I read, which is Lee Heather. It is obvious that not real changes will be done by this board. It is incredible. Savings can be made without any effect on children if you look at FTE. Thank you so much for your comments. George Borda, Mr. Kirpin, forget about the print shop. This is your bête noire. It's a new term for me, as well as yeoman. I'm not sure what that means, but it's probably a French term meaning something that will bring me down. Let's deal with meat and potatoes. Thank you, George. Sam Deek, I've been working in the Port Washington School District for 25 years now. We've never had a problem with our school budget until now. Indeed, many things have been different, Mr. Deek. Jean Marie Lavigny, how does the possibility of remote learning for Q1 affect the budget? How does the possibility for remote learning for Q1 affect the budget? I'm not sure. Again, if Mary and Mike, you wanna tag team that one.
Yeah, so I could start that. Because it affects the budget, I think, and that's part of the reason why I believe that we're looking to include $500,000 from reserves, because there are lots of things that we have to consider, whether it's a hybrid model, whether we have students come in part-time, whether it's a staggered schedule, whether there's an increase of transportation. As far as technology is concerned, whether we do have to allocate more pieces of equipment for technology. I think there's a lot of things that we have to consider, and certainly we will be planning for that, and we are planning for it now. So I think the more flexibility we have in that regard is certainly going to help. And then there, of course, there's, as we said before, the professional development aspect of that as well, because we'll talk about this more on Thursday. We want to make sure that the plan that we have in place now and the plan that we have in place in September are different plans, more robust plans, plans that are really focused on making sure that students are engaged the whole time, whether they are in school or whether they are out of school. And all of that takes planning, and all of that takes resources.
Thank you so much, Mike. And next up, Lee Heather's back. And she asks, who is in charge here, Ms. Callahan or the board? Sam Deek answered her with the board, and in fact, he is correct. The board under President Johnson, Vice President Weisberg, and yours truly as the chair of the Budget and Facilities Committee are in fact in charge. Thanks for asking. Lee Heather says, I have never created a budget. What about I have advised the board on the budget? Not sure what that refers to, but thanks for sharing. Adam Block, the budget says 2018 to 2019 electricity and gas is $1 million combined. It says 2019 to 20 is 1.1 million. Where are the savings from heat and electric from the school shutdowns during March, April, May, June? Ms. Callahan, I'll let you speak to this, but I am certain that we have realized some savings that will go to our reserves.
As part of the almost $3 million I mentioned earlier, I would anticipate savings from heat, because heat was lowered in the buildings. Electricity was not shut off because computers were needed, and we had folks working remotely from home in every building. But we have not done a line item actual savings for 1920, because 1920 doesn't end until June 30th.
Thank you very much, Ms. Callahan. Just noting that I'm going to close further comments and questions after my last comment. Kind of like that guy that walks at the end of the Disney line when the ride needs to shut off, or when a character needs to go to the bathroom. I am anticipating cutting off the comments and questions in order to end on time. Claire Cabot asks, why reduce if we are in line with what other districts are doing? I'll answer, at least briefly, that we have to take into account the unique circumstance that our community has. We as a board believe that our community has been hit pretty hard by this crisis in our wallets, and we are trying to be as absolutely sensitive and as we can to that fact, and act responsibly. Board members, if anyone wants to add anything, you can jump in, but certainly I think I speak for you all on that. Okay, next up, Ms. Lavigny. In the draft online, there is an additional $183K allocated to supplies, with $32K for health equipment compared to last year's budget. Wouldn't trimming this save the para and or PEP teachers? And I believe when you say PEP teachers, you're referring to our esteemed teachers. Ms. Callahan, can you speak to the 183K for supplies and 32K for health equipment?
I believe the version of the budget that is right now online is a much earlier version. As I said at the very beginning of the meeting, and perhaps Ms. Livigny was not present at the beginning, we have a $461,000 cut in all sorts of building supplies. That $32,000, to the best of my recollection, does not exist still in the health department. It is probably at $15,000 or $16,000.
Thank you, Ms. Callahan. Lee Heather is up next. By the way, I once knew a Heather Lee, so I don't think it's the Heather Lee that I knew. She was in Cleveland, but if you are in fact not Lee Heather and Heather Lee, you're the second Heather Lee that I've known. She notes that a lot of children will not be sent back to school in September. That remains to be seen, but thank you for your perspective. John Casal notes that, yes, thank you, Ms. Johnson, for adding that. Ms. Lavigny, I am delighted to report that we were able to restore the esteemed teachers. And as you know now, the Paris. John Casal, I'm from a school district that has no public committee learning about the process. I'm amazed by the transparency and discussion. Your effort shows respect for the community, teachers, and mainly your students. Thank you, Jan. Much appreciated. Adam Block, again, shouldn't there be an extra $300K, 3 months shut of a 12-month year in the budget from reduced electricity, gas, from having the school shut? Ms. Callahan, I believe your comments already spoke to that. Would you like to add anything?
No, I think we have to wait until the end of June to see exactly what our total invoices were.
Thank you. Lee Heather notes that she doesn't think the board is going to respond to Mr. Block. I'm proud to say that we did, in fact, respond. And it has been very important to me as the Budget and Facilities Chair to have comments and to respond to any comments and questions where possible. I'm very proud of that. Rebecca Hughes Parker asks, how does commodity price psychology translate to cutting school budget if the levy is messaged that way? If some won't vote for raise, is 1.99 different than 2.02? You know, I can't say, and I don't think any of us can say for sure. I can for sure tell you that commodity price psychology is very different from school budget, and I'll be the first to admit that. But I have to go by what I know, and it is the opinion of this board that having to draw the line somewhere, we believe that we have a good enough chance. Frankly, I still think we have a very, very big challenge, dare I say, to use the word of the day, a yeoman's challenge ahead of us to pass the budget even at 1.99. But I believe, and some other board members agree with me, that our chances are improved at 1.99 versus 2.02, for instance. Claire May says, thank you. And to you, I say, you're welcome. George Borden notes that we all have our bête noirs. And I can't wait to Google bête noirs after this meeting, George, and get back to you about perhaps some other bête noirs that I might have. And at that point, I shut off comments and questions, but I invited anyone else that's watching to email me at dkirpin@portnet.org. You can also email the entire board at boe@portnet.org. And I do hope all of you that are watching can join us at the board meeting tomorrow night. We'll be live streaming and coming right back at you. Same great channel, new day and time tomorrow night. And until then, thank you all so much for joining us. And I wish you all a super, super wonderful, safe, and healthy day. Bye-bye for